Hi friends, I'm Jeffy G. I have a handful of predictions for 2024 that might affect you. It might affect the gear that you buy. It might affect decisions you make in your musical career. Whether you're a home studio producer or a successful studio engineer or a musician who's playing live gigs, all of these things will have an impact, I promise you that. I know it's a bit late. Here we are in February. Usually people make these predictions early in January. I gotta apologize for that. I thought long and hard about these before I decided to make this video. Number one on my list is artificial intelligence. But what I'm predicting here is a shift from the early AI programs that we saw to something that's more targeting musicians and producers. Here's the thing. We've been seeing AI programs that try to bypass the artistic creation process. So if you need music for a video or for commercial or for TV, there have been some programs out there that are really easy to use. You type in a prompt, you put in some parameters, and boom, you've got music that you can reuse. Now, it's great that those programs can generate music on the fly, but how different is that really than just having a stock arsenal of songs that you could buy or acquire inexpensively on the internet? So while some of those programs that target the end user have become popular, there were also things going on in the music production field. We've all seen voice cloning. We've all talked about using ChatGPT for generating lyrics with various levels of success. And we've seen AI programs that will take a standard song that you upload and split it out into its component parts. Sometimes we call this isolating stems. So you'd have the vocals on one track and the drums on another. These come with various levels of success. But generally, there's been big improvements there. But what I'm talking about is a shift to tools that really help musicians and producers. They don't necessarily cut us out of the equation, but they enhance what we do and how we do it. One of the leaders there has been iZotope, who have released a variety of products that just take the best practices for things like mixing or adjusting vocals or cleaning up the sound that you're using to eliminate bad noise and difficulties. Something you use as a correction tool, something that you can use as a sound enhancement tool. What I predict is there will be more AI programs targeting musicians and producers. I think those companies are realizing that rather than cut people out of the picture, enhance what they do, make their lives easier and more productive is probably the best way to sell new services. Now, I've had a lot of fun with AI over the last 2 or 3 years. There's some great programs out there where you can clone a voice or generate a riff. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether AI is truly behind that, or is it just a rules engine that's encapsulated all of what's in music theory and harmony and made it easy for the end user to use. It's hard to say. Number 2 is Midi 2.0, MPC, and polyphonic aftertouch. These technologies are probably going to impact the next MIDI controller device you buy. What we saw late last year is a few vendors come to the market with those technologies built into their MIDI controller. Specifically, the Korg Key Stage is one, and then Native Instruments did a major upgrade to their S-Series keyboards. They didn't take full advantage of Midi 2.0, but they do deliver polyphonic aftertouch. And I think we're going to see more vendors jumping on that bandwagon. But the question is, are they really fully embracing Midi 2.0? If I understand it correctly, interacting with your DAW and with virtual instruments will be a two-way street with Midi 2.0. That means your DAW can send information to the controller, titles, tracks, details of the plugins that you're using, and alter your MIDI controller so it's ready to take advantage of those things. Currently, if you want to map endless encoders and faders and the controls that are on your hardware, you have to do it through a manual effort of MIDI mapping, and that varies from vendor to vendor. Well, can you imagine if every vendor delivers information that automatically maps your MIDI controller for you? And it's interactive depending on what virtual instruments and plugins you're using. So I see two things there. This could make all MIDI controllers and MIDI control devices obsolete very quickly, driving us towards considering new hardware. And there's two ways that could be delivered. One is that you need to buy a new device. The other is that there's a firmware upgrade to the controls, the physical controls of your MIDI controller that take advantage of MIDI 2.0, MPC compatibility, and polyphonic aftertouch. Although the latter, polyphonic aftertouch, I think does depend on the hardware. So that's a big question for the coming year. And it doesn't just apply to keyboards, but it might have a big impact on control surfaces, like a fader port or a Q-Con. But some of those devices currently are a bit of a one-way street. When you use physical faders or motorized faders to control your DAW, it's relying upon a standard that was defined many years ago, like the Huey standard or the Mackie standard. Imagine not having those limitations anymore, where not only can you adjust your DAW using that physical device, but your DAW can interact with that physical device to update titles and changes and reassignments. That could make your existing control surface obsolete. And extend that even further to Groovebox devices like the MPC or the Native Instruments Machina. Those devices, again, are limited right now to the capabilities of MIDI that are built into your DAW or whatever software you're using. Is that going to make an MPC or a Native Instruments Machina obsolete as well? Now, we've already seen some evidence of how this might be delivered. When Native Instruments first came out with their new S-Series keyboards, with the bigger display and a different arrangement of buttons and controls, there was a lot of skepticism in the market. Is this a big change? And gradually, Native Instruments has now updated a lot of their virtual instruments software to take advantage of the capabilities of the hardware. There's always this back and forth between companies that come out with new hardware, or do you come out with new software first and deliver the hardware later, or do you try and deliver everything at once? My third prediction is greater adoption of Dolby ATMOS. What we've seen in the last few years is dedicated studios that you can take your music to that will do the engineering for Dolby ATMOS. But I think it's not beyond the capabilities anymore of home studios. You could buy some additional speakers, and you could set up your own Dolby ATMOS capabilities in your home studio or your budget production studio. I've taken a look at this technology myself and thought, do you have to be a special engineer in order to understand the way this works? Not really. Is it something that we can learn? Yes. Is there demands to deliver your music using Dolby ATMOS? I would say yes. Another technology that I think will impact music production is being spearheaded by Apple with the Vision Pro VR headset. And they're not the only game in town. I think we're going to see a lot of other vendors jump on that bandwagon as more software becomes available. But there's a bit of a question mark about how that will work in the music production arena. Some vendors have released software for mixing or surround sound that sit you right in the studio, that make it seem like you're sitting right at Abbey Road, for example. And this software is now aware of how you turn your head and the way you hear things, and the dynamics of that studio are changing. Now, that might be the first practical application for the Vision Pro, but I think we're going to see a lot more. Then from the performance perspective, I think there's a whole other world that hasn't been tapped yet about musicians playing in a group, all wearing VR headsets. What does that mean? What does it look like? What kind of demands does it put onto your internet bandwidth? Is there new techniques there for collaborating that we really haven't thought of yet? So get ready for VR. Will it be a big deal in 2024? Yes, I think people will start testing the waters, and by 2025, you might find that more musicians and producers are using VR. Another change in 2024 that I'm not too excited about is the elimination of the private ownership of music. And this is a big concern for artists that have typically made money from selling entire albums. With streaming services competing for your dollars, and there being some questionable funding for the artist, the ability to actually own the digital rights of music by paying something and adding it to your collection seemed to be vanishing. For a long time, Apple iTunes would let you buy an entire album, and there were other sources on the internet where you could buy an entire album and own the music, whether you owned it digitally or physically on a CD or some other medium. But streaming services have changed that to just temporarily renting what you hear. And that has an impact for artists because it is less permanent and the money paid to the artists is much lower. So without private ownership of music, it raises some big questions about the durability of music. 30 or 40 years ago, people used to buy an album, listen to it, read the liner notes, become familiar with the band, and we had something called recording artists. These were people that toured to promote their album, but their primary job was working in the studio to write songs and release new material. That notion of the recording artist seems to be vanishing, which is quite unfortunate. Another similar trend we're going to see in 2024 is more consolidation. And I can't tell you whether that's good or bad, but there are some conglomerate music companies that are well funded by private equity that are looking for high returns. They'll typically look at innovative companies with some new technology that they think can be harvested for greater revenue and profits. We've already seen quite a bit of this in 2023. Moog, the synthesizer company, was bought up by another company. Conglomerate that owns Native Instruments bought up Isotope and many other companies. And we've got to keep a close eye on Apple. With the amount of cash they have, there's some question about will they get into other aspects of music production. The drivers for a lot of these acquisitions are unfortunately strictly profit and return. Now, if you're a small company that makes a plug-in or a virtual instrument, an addition to a DAW, or perhaps you make a musical device, the climate is good for you to attract investment funds. But the real question is, will the conglomerate buy your company to put it on the shelf, or will they make it part of their main offering? Now, the last prediction I'm going to make is not a big surprise, but I think we're going to see even more work done with iOS music production. There are some new iPads coming to the market from Apple that will make pro apps that were only available before on a Mac available on an iPad. And I have my own opinions about it. I do use iOS music production software myself, and I see it as a front-end ideas type of engine before I move into the studio to do some serious recording. But the capability of a lot of iOS applications has already resulted in people doing full albums, complete production, releasing that all on an iOS device. It's really quite impressive. And last year, Apple came out with Logic for iPad. I don't think many of the other vendors are going to be far behind. You're probably going to see things like Ableton, or you've already got Cubasis available on an iPad, but you'll probably see Ableton, Studio One, and some of the other vendors jump on the iOS bandwagon. Where a few years ago, I would say iOS music production was a bit of a novelty, I think it'll become part of the standard going forward. What's your opinion about these predictions? What do you see as the big changes for 2024? Do you think some of the things I mentioned are relevant? Or maybe they're not? Put your ideas in the comments. Consider subscribing to the channel. If you like what I had to say, click on the like button. Thanks for watching.